I hand things over to מכובדי Rabbi Avi Grossman.
It's quite sad. I remember just last week we were sitting here and we finished right around 9:30, and that's when the messages were sent out that Rav Zuriel had passed away. We had joined Rav Zuriel's WhatsApp group. It was run by one of his most loyal Talmidim, and they basically were in charge of putting all his material online. He would have shiurim on a regular basis online, also on Zoom. They were uploaded to YouTube and to Facebook, and he had a lot of a shoot. He had shilas and chuvas that they'd also put up on a regular basis, and it sort of fooled me. These last 3 weeks has been Benazmanim, and I noticed there was less material coming out from Rav Zuriel, and I knew he had some ups and downs in fighting his illness. And what happened? Suddenly it slacked off, and I should have clued into that. I should have gone, and I regret not taking time to visit Rav Zuriel. I was actually supposed to go visit him. It was in the schedule. It was supposed to be this week, and I didn't get there on time. And I didn't realize it was because he had taken a turn for the worse. They didn't say it. He didn't want people to know about this so much. He tried to keep it sort of undercover. And my action was sadness and shock, but also I had to mute that expression because I thought perhaps I should be tearing my shirt. It'd be proper to eulogize him. And then I remember specifically that he had instructed that people not do so, which is going to be a topic we're going to discuss, which I think highlights Rav Zuriel's personality, his Torah personality, his modesty, his humility, and his standing up for what he believed to be right. He is, I think, like the Rav himself, a person who's decided on taking positions, even if they're unpopular, and expressing them, and not taking into account pragmatism or politics, favoritism, or any of these other human biases we have that perhaps make us mute our true views. We shouldn't be doing that. So Rav Zuriel really lived this, and he encouraged us to do so. So I'll begin with how I became involved with Rav Zuriel, and I would like to say also that, as per his request, and based on the Gemara, we will not be eulogizing him, but more like expressing my personal appreciation. Sometimes a personal appreciation is a writer or a speaker talks about someone and tells you why everybody should appreciate him. But in this case, it's much more personal. I personally appreciate everything that Rav Zuriel did for me. He picked me up when I was down and was there to support me in a lot of my endeavors, personal endeavors and publishing endeavors. He was single-handedly the one who's contributed the most to that which I've been working on, my writings, for the last 6 years, up until this point, and basically up until his last week. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to him and give him my final appreciation. So I remember when we first met with Rav Zuriel. By we, I mean most of the time when I did meet him in person, I was with my wife. She insisted on coming, and it wasn't that many. I didn't meet him more than 3 times, but we corresponded a lot after that. And Rav Zuriel, I think, explained that he was actually born in Germany, but got out there right before the war. He must have been a baby, no more than a year old, when his parents fled Germany with him. I think there's some unverified stories you could find online, but whatever it is, his upbringing was completely American. He learned in Baltimore, but as an older teenager, he came to Eretz Yisrael. And I looked this up. I was talking about my Rebbe who passed away this year, back in February, Rabbi Braunspiegel. Rabbi Braunspiegel was similarly born in that year, 1938, Leminyanam, also in Europe, and but he was stuck in Europe during the war, and he was basically raised in America after that, even though Hebrew was his second language. And Rav Zuriel was likewise. Rav Zuriel knew languages, and also he mostly insisted on teaching and speaking in Hebrew, especially to his family. So Rabbi Braunspiegel was not with us the last few years. He was quite ill, was sometimes mostly unresponsive. So we had been cut off from him at least the last decade. And Rav Zuriel really filled in that gap. Rav Zuriel was always accessible. He loved to have guests all the time. There are many others could be hundreds. I don't think it's thousands, but there's been quite a few others who have had the schus to become correspondents of his and talmidim of his through that direction. Why? He was teaching in Shalvim in their main program. He was their mashgiach, I think, basically since the inception of the yeshiva, and he retired quite a few years ago. Settled in Bnei Brak. He had always lived in Bnei Brak, I think, but he basically stayed there. He didn't get out that much afterwards. So for people who speak English, Anglophones, they haven't had the exposure. Even those who were in the American program at Shalvim didn't have the full exposure to the mashgiach because they have their own staff there. They do their own thing. And Rav Zuriel, if you look for him, you'll find his material in English, mostly in articles. And you wouldn't be able to match, let's say 20 years ago, only a few could match the face. This article appears in, let's say, the Rabbinic Journal here or the Jewish Press article there. They see this name, Moshe Zuriel, the rabbi, but they don't know who he was. He didn't train American students. So among people who speak English, he's not as known as he should be. I'm familiar with things going on, let's say, in that bastion of American, Anglo-American Torah world, and let's say Ramat Beit Shemesh, and it hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. Okay, so I think that perhaps we should correct that. As the Rav noted, Rav Zuriel has quite a bibliography. We're starting to collect his books. His farm over there, that bookshelf is entirely his, and there's some others, his farm elsewhere. We called him Bala Otros because he used that expression Oseroth, means the treasuries of Rav Kook. There's a one volume dedicated to the Gra, another one to the Rambam. There's Otzros HaMusar, which I just bought 2 volumes. You can find them all over the place. No, Beis Medrash is incomplete without his works. And also introducing us to Rav Kook. Many of us growing up in America were not properly exposed to Rav Kook's teachings, and Rav Zuriel made them accessible, which is indispensable. You need these. So I'll share, begin the personal messages he said. The last time we were with him, sorry about that. The last time we were with him, he was insisting, remember, make Rambam the car of your study. He told us, you study the Gemara, so you have to know how halacha comes out of that. So the Vilna Gaon, for example, had a seder. He would learn the Rif and the Rush, the Psak halacha that comes from that. Less Pilpul, more Sinai. What's the facts? And Rav Zuriel liked the Rambam because he codified it, and that's the Rambam codified the halacha and also organized it. If you're studying the Rif and the Rush, you will not get the entire Psak of the entire Shas. You can't do that. But the Rambam did. The Rambam endeavored to do it and put it all together and was consistent, and even has an introduction which tells you his methodology, how he comes about deciding these halachas and the traditions, and he makes mention of previous decisions. The Rambam should be the Ikar. Like I told some of the students, when you learn Rashi on the Gemara, Rashi explains the Gemara, but you don't get the Psak out of it. Whereas Rambam isn't telling you how to learn the Gemara. You see from his Psak how he understood it. 2 different approaches to doing it. So Rav Zuriel said, you stick with the Rambam. His children this week told me that they don't speak English so much, even though Rav Zuriel spoke English to people like us. He allowed that. His children, he didn't. He told them they first have to l'malei kresam, fill their stomachs, so to speak, with bread and meat. That is studying the Rambam. First finish Mishnah Torah, and then they could start studying English, for example. So his children are completely Israeli, and also a very fine family. They make anybody proud, but certainly Rav Zuriel, it's one of his greatest accomplishments. And he also said, always use mnemonics. How did he remember where everything was in the classics farm? He says, use a mnemonic, for example. He says, when you see this siman in Shulchan Aruch, so remember what it spells out. We're going to talk about Yoredeus, Siman, Shin Dalid Mem. And those who know Gematrias know, wait a minute, you're supposed to put the Mem before the Dalid. No, but that spells Shmad. So the printers already, certain Gematrias don't exist. Instead of Shin Mem Dalid, it's Shin Dalid Mem. And Siman Reish Ayin Bet, which spells Ra'av or Ra'ev, famine or hungry. So the printers spell it Reish Bet Aleph, etc. So I remember Shin Dalid Mem, okay, because it's one of those, and that's how you remember the Siman, so you can think to it. He always said, remember the Siman. and we like studying the Chafetz Chaim Chelek Chet. Now, the eighth part of the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. So, how do you remember that? It's Chet 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 Chet. And there's an important lesson there when we were discussing also, the nature of lashon hara, and perhaps the Chafetz Chaim there has a heter, and like we said, sometimes it's best not to publish a heter, even though Chafetz Chaim is correct. It's best if you're writing a book, Musar, telling people not to speak lashon hara. Don't write a case where it's permissible. Why? Because people will misuse that. Okay, so the Rav mentioned meeting Rav Zuriel. I wasn't there at the time. I only had the chance to make his acquaintance in Tufshin Ayin Zayin, right at the beginning of Tufshin Ayin Zayin. It was the Rav who recommended that I contact him because I ran into my own troubles, mostly because I began my writings and I was publicizing opinions that apparently aren't acceptable in the Haredi world. And I was surprised by some of them. Now, looking back, there was someone who was discussing, we're looking back, what opinions they were. Basically, opinions that that you could find in Kisvei Rav Kapach, what Rav Kapach wrote, and Rabbi Rabinovich Sr. Now, already then, Rabbi Rabinovich was, well on in years, and he wasn't that active anymore. And he took a number of controversial opinions, but he's very much right in his opinions. And those were considered unacceptable, and it's not for polite company, so they had to be minimized. And it was easier to just attack the messenger than to go against these great sages of the past century. So that's how I met Reb Zuriel, and he was a source of great encouragement to this day. I remember he was the most outspoken about certain things that you and I know about. So he said it very explicitly, and he was at the time he was the first one to actually say it, and I believe it was the truth. And that's enough for that matter. And I have the deepest most profound gratitude for him for doing that for me, especially because we were deprived. We couldn't speak to, let's say, for example, Rabbi Rabinovich. I wanted to show him some things. They told me he couldn't even read. Rabbi Wein also, Rabbi Barrow Wein for a while, especially even before Corona, was already not able to do things. He told me, I can't read. It'd be great, but I can't see anything new anymore. And of course, Rabbi Bronspiegel was unacceptable. So it was good that Rabbi Zuriel stepped in. And my wife thought that I was she thought, oh, you're Rebbe. That's how she referred to him because of the way he expressed his love of Talmidim to me. I was basically a new Talmid, but it was though he stepped in for Rabbi Bronspiegel, who knew me for many years and was our Masada Kedushin, and he basically took over. The personality was very similar. They dressed the same, they acted the same. They came from a different generation, and he basically adopted people like us. So when I started writing, he told me not to stop. And like I said, this is 6 years ago. 2 years later, I was able to complete Haggadah Pesach, thanks to him. Rabbi Zuriel was the one who reviewed the entire manuscript. And he sent me 2 documents. The first was a very nice approbation that he personally wrote. And he was the first one to write such a thing, which basically opened up the door for others to get on board. When for example, the chief rabbi saw it and Rav Lior saw it, so they added on. So that was good. And he also wrote the second longer document was all his thoughts on the matter, from everything down to Nikud. He read every single word in the Haggadah and went over it. Him and Rabbi Weber, Yibado L'Chaim Tovim, the Rosh Hashiva of Yeshivat Har Bayit, also went over everything, also had what to say, and we made many appropriate adjustments, additions, subtractions. They basically served as thorough editors of this Haggadah, and he didn't ask anything for it. He did it over the course of just 2 days. And that continued with this first pamphlet. As you know, this Halu B'Teika Shofar was everything I had to do in the Haggadah, in the introduction, but was not relevant to Passover. It had to do with the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So he also reviewed this, and we were able to print it before the Haggadah actually went to printing. And there was other parts to it, which I've been talking about, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, the third part, which is about Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. So we finished work on that. He went over everything again. That was 2 years ago. And he also sent more material to add to it. and some discussions. He was the one who sent me some sources. It was great, and it's been very hard to get out the printing. We've been stopped in certain places, and I finally put it together just this month. We were ready to go to printing, and I dedicated it to his refuah over here. As you can see, it says the refuat Rav Moshe Zuriel, and at the beginning, there's a prayer. Came off the presses this week. It says Arachamoni Kaim Bono Chachmei Yisrael. It's dedicated to his recovery. And like I said, I got this from the printer on Sunday, and I was supposed to bring it to him on Sunday and trade books. I was supposed to pick up some Sfarim then, and sorry. So it was Thursday night. We got the message that he passed away, and this is already at the printer. So I had to present it to his children instead, and so I decided not to change it. We had to tell the printer. He wondered, so you can say Zecher Nishmas, Ili Nishmas. I said no. We completed it when it was. We completed it when we wanted it for his chus, and we're going to go through with that, and not change anything because I can't make any changes he didn't see. So the next book he's not going to get to see, but this one it would be wrong to even change even the title page if he hadn't seen it. So that's how we're going to do it. So, like I said, I wasn't able to cry at the shiva because now I'll get into the technical aspect. I thought there wasn't supposed to be a shiva. Why not? What happened? This is the story that brings out his godless and, like I said, his anava, his greatness, his scholarship, and his humility. Around the time we were finishing compiling material for this book, I sent him another email. I just said, and by the way, there's a halachic issue of which that has come to my attention in one of the journals, the Chakira journal. Rabbi Brody, who is now the head of the Halachic Organ Donation Society, they're in the news again. So that's his operation now. He's quite good. He's been writing scholarly articles and also more accessible articles for Bali Batim. They've been appearing in the Jerusalem Post now at least 15 years. So Rabbi Brody wrote an article about how Rabbi Brody's learned father released Rabbi Brody from having to observe the traditional period of mourning for him. Now, I've heard about this heter before. The scholars they open up Yoredea, the mark 344, Shin Daled Mem, and they see that the Shach says that a father, a parent, can release his son from having son or daughter, by the way, it just says father, son, but it applies equally to mother, father, son, daughter, from having to observe the period of mourning beyond Shloshim. Normally, a person is bereaved. He loses someone who is a close relative, so he has to observe mourning, Avilut, up to 30 days. Sometimes, by the way, the Avilut's cut short because of a holiday. A holiday happens during the first 30 days. So that ends those 30 days of mourning, if you remember these halachot. So there is this idea that's brought up at first explicitly in a tshuva of the Mahariu, Rabbi Yaakov Weil, who was, if I'm not mistaken, he was active in the 14th century, a posek of the 14th century, about 100 years before the Beis Yosef, and he argued based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which talks about someone before they're the deceased, but before they're deceased, they instruct their heirs not to have eulogies. I don't want to be eulogized. That's what it says. Al tasbiduni, or al tasbidu oso ha'ish, referring to himself. And the Gemara there rules that he is listened to. His words are accepted, and they're not supposed to eulogize him, which, by the way, Rav Zuriel instructed his heirs to do for him. They were not to eulogize him, which is why, I'm sorry, I was beginning to cry there, but we're not supposed to eulogize Rav Zuriel. We're just going to give a little bit of his Torah here. So that was the assumption that a father can release his son, and I've heard about this in certain cases. Rav Shechter, for example, in New York, it's related that his father knew about this heter of the Shach, which is brought from the Mahariu, and Rav Shechter didn't observe the mourning beyond 30 days. And there's a good reason if the person's an active Rav, if he has to observe certain aspects of mourning during those 12 months, he's prevented from doing that which the community needs him to do. Now, this heter has been adopted in the literature subsequently. Many great achronim have assumed this heter. Now, one of the things I wanted to write was that, with all respect to the Mahariyu, it is certainly not clear if, let's say, his contemporaries accepted what he had to say, if later authorities like the Beis Yosef himself or the Ramah, who had access to this responsum, held of this heter, and that perhaps Maimonides himself and other Rishonim would not have hold of such a thing. They don't understand the relevant sources. So I wrote this up, my response. It wasn't necessarily a response to Rabbi Brody, what he was saying. I'm just saying that perhaps the basis is not, perhaps even Rabbi Bar-Hayim could give his opinion on this matter. I don't know what it is. But I tried to make my point, and I wrote it as a response in Hebrew to the Chakira journal. And I was preparing it for publication. It was accepted for publication in Chakira. It was published a year ago, basically, a year and a half ago. And I sent it, like everything else I was working on, to Rav Zuriel to discuss. And this was the first, and to my knowledge, the only time where he majorly disagreed with something I had written, a position I had taken. In this particular case, he said, no, not only that, says, read what Rabbi Akiva Eger says. Rabbi Akiva Eger says that the argument is like the Shvus Yaakov, who says it's even more stronger. There is a Talmudic argument, which you're welcome. Well, maybe we should discuss in a more in-depth share some other time. There is a Talmudic argument that anyone who passes away, or before his own passing, can tell all of his heirs, not just his children, that there should be no mourning period for him. Not the first day of mourning, not Shiva, not Shloshim, and not the 12 months if it's apparent. The heter that the Shach brings is the mourning period beyond that of Shloshim. So I thought Rabbi Akiva Eger was bringing this argument as an ad absurdum, that if you accept this argument, it proves too much. It basically says, like some have said, what's left of Avelus? It's a mitzvah, and it was a problem. Sorry about that. So this was something that Rav Zuriel felt very strongly about, Rabbi Akiva Eger's argument, and also Rav Zuriel said that once this is an argument among the Posakim, there's a lenient opinion, there's a stringent opinion. The halacha is, regarding mourning, that we always follow the lenient opinion. Now, I wanted to argue with him at the time. I didn't get to do this. I thought maybe he wanted to end that discussion. But I thought that was talking about lenient and stringent opinions mentioned in the Talmud. But if someone comes up with some sort of lenient havamina in the 1500s, let's say, it doesn't suddenly make it the law, or a kula as opposed to a chumrah. Now that's what's accepted by everybody. But that point aside, Zuriel wrote his response, and that response was appended to my article in Chakira. So you could have, we'll send the link there. And he said, I just happen to disagree with everything said. And can you go to the nitty gritty of my arguments? He just said, this way, do. So in the continuing correspondence, I asked him if he meant it that this should really be followed the halach. He says yes. And he also told his own heirs that they should not be mourning for him, period. No eulogies. And he doesn't want anybody sitting Shiva for him at all. And I was very surprised. And he wrote to me why he did that. He says his children are studying all the time. True, his sons are rabbinic personalities, and he doesn't want to take them away from their studies. Dying for a minute. It's a tircha for them. And that's what he really felt that should be done. So when he passed away, you could see that they arranged the funeral quite quickly, Thursday night, and there was no time for eulogies. They didn't allow for it. And I was surprised because then his grandchildren sent out a message that they were sitting Shiva at Rav Zuriel's house. So my wife and I went just this week to see what was going on, because I had with me a published article from Rav Zuriel that's been quite public, that that this is an issue if the deceased forgives, he waives this period of mourning, so it's not to be done. Just like when the deceased says, please don't eulogize me, we are to listen to what he said. And I also had the personal emails that he wrote to me in Hebrew and in English. So I went there and I saw that they were sitting Shiva, and they allowed me to speak. They apparently they knew me. I had never met them before, but they knew me by name. The Rebbitzin knew my wife also. She's like, "Oh, you're back. Why don't you do what I told you to do?" That's another thing. And I showed them these materials. I showed them the article. I showed them the email. He said, "Hi, Mike. Why aren't you doing as I guess the rabbi's instructions?" And they said, "Well, they're not as strong as their father was." He said, "For people like you, you know, Rabbi Zuriel's later students. So you're his students. You actually were learning with him, and you asked for his opinion. And you follow what he told you to do. But the rest of us have a Haredi upbringing, and we're sort of stuck doing. We have to toe the line. We can't do differently." Rabbi Zuriel said to them right beforehand, "By the way, I know what I've told you to do, but then Lolam al yishanem b'pnei machloket. Don't be different if it's going to cause a controversy." It's very important. They live in Bnei Brak. So he told them, use your judgment. And I also heard from already Rabbanei ear, city rabbis, when I brought this up to them, they said, "Yeah, but for a great man like this, you're not supposed to listen. You're supposed to mourn a great man like this." My wife had a different argument. And also when another fellow told me this just today. Sometimes Aveluth is perhaps it's not like the Mahariyu argue the Shvus Yaakov and Rabbi Kiva Eger that it's out of respect for the deceased. Sometimes Avilut is for the survivors to learn to get it all out. The Rambam says there are people who like to cry. Why do people need to cry? What does the Rambam say? They get it all out. They cry it out and until it breaks their spirit, and then they're able to start regrowing. If you keep it inside, your pain and your sadness, then it'll just eat you away. It'll be more destructive. You have to let it out. So sometimes sitting shiva is less about this. And by the way, I should append what I had written. There's an argument for. I had argued that sitting shiva is straight a mitzvah of the Torah, or at least the Rabbanan, and has nothing to do with respect of the deceased. Even though some people tried to make a duke like that, that was basically the point of our argument. But then I came to realize that, like my wife said, it wouldn't be fair not to have a shiva for such a great man because people have to cry. It's almost cruel if they would not have a shiva. So that's why I was not surprised eventually to find that the whole family was sitting shiva. Rav Zuriel, despite the fact that he took a very clear halachic position, was humble enough to allow for perhaps even in his passing, his position wouldn't be the accepted position. It's one thing to take a halachic position, but it's perhaps an act of arrogance to think that, like Chazal say, someone who's not such a great scholar says, "Kabalu dati." What's Kabalu dati? Accept my opinion. They don't impose their opinion. They express it. They put their opinion out there. They let people evaluate it, judge it, at least peers who can do, those who are qualified to evaluate an opinion, and they could see for themselves what they're going to do. So Zuriel was like that, even though he had very strong opinions regards to many matters. And that was most important. He always said, stick to your learning, and don't let anybody ever try to silence you, especially if you believe you're correct. If you have an opinion there that's explicit in Shas, that's correct. If it's the opinion you find in the Rishonim, in their interpretation of Shas, that's the truth, and don't let anybody try to silence that. Stand up for it. Too often there are things that we're trying to hide. Rav Zuriel, as you know, for example, was signed on the proclamation, the Kol Koreh, public request to ascend the Temple Mount. He was one of the early ones, so you could find it. It's a matter of public record, among other things. Rav Zuriel took very, very strong opinions. It turns out the first thing I read from him was regarding that whole Mitzitza controversy. The whole thing, you remember how they conduct Brit Milah. There was a controversy about that, and he spoke out about that. He wrote it. You could find the Jewish press. These are all matters of public record. Most of that which he said is well known and can be verified and documented. Rav Zuriel, like I said, the only regret I have is that we did not get to meet again and finish what we had started. But hopefully, God willing, we'll be able to continue in his derech. We'll be able to strengthen ourselves in the knowledge that as long as we stick to studying the way he taught us to study, then we should have success. And also, we thank him for the vast, voluminous, copious amount of material that he left for us to study. I'm only beginning to study some of his Sfarim. I haven't had a chance to do it. I haven't finished Shas, and we don't have Rambam down pat. But once we get there, we have to finish the the Otros over there, Rav Kook's writings. Otros and Musar is a very important sefer, I think. I can't. He used to sneak in, by the way, essays. Like we studied Otros Agra. When Rav Zuriel really felt strongly about something, he made it the topic of an essay there. By the way, just to know, here's what everybody says, but it's the truth is otherwise. I'll close with another thing that we learned from him. Rav Zuriel insisted, as you can see from him, in not confusing Kabbalistic teachings, which are fine, by the way. A lot of people, that's what animates them. Teachings of the Ari, the Zohar, the Shla, etc. Those should not be confused with halacha. Too often, those are confused with halacha. Rav Zuriel put out, just before his passing, a video telling everybody it's an obligation to wear tefillin on Chol Moed. So that's not a popular position among Sephardim, among Israelis, among many. The Gra himself didn't believe in it. But what the point is, around here, you can't get away with wearing tefillin on Chol Moed, just like the Rav is saying all the time. You should wear your tefillin on Chol Moed. So he took this position very publicly before his passing. Why? Because he knew it was the correct position based on the Talmud. And the arguments basically against wearing tefillin are Kabbalistic arguments, like the Beit Yosef himself wrote. So he says, don't confuse it. Al pi Kabbalah, there's one thing, but halacha, you have to be kovadin and tahar. And another example would be what's starting this week, at least for the Spartan. When are you supposed to say slichot? I was speaking to two rabbis that week when I was discussing this with him. Al pi Kabbalah, there's a problem with saying the slichot and Yud Gimel Midot and other types of supplications when the first half of the night, before midnight. But after midnight, that's the proper time for slichot. And there are even Ashkenazic Achronim who adopted this position as though it was straight halacha. Magen Avraham first, and Ramosha Feinstein after him. But as we learned from Rav Zuriel, there's Kabbalah on one hand, and there's halacha on the other hand, and you cannot confuse the two. And really, Lefi Ikar Hadim, according to the strict letter of the law, really there's no specific time of day for slichot. The Rambam mentions they would say the Ashmoret Haboker, which means the last third of the night. Basically, instead of us davening vasikin, which means you wake up at dawn so you could start your ablutions and get ready for prayer so you could start the Shmon Esrei right at sunrise. Instead, you'll be getting up an hour or two even earlier so you could say slichot. But that doesn't mean that the Rambam, for example, believed that there was anything wrong with saying slichot the first half of the night. And by the way, a lot of places, they end up saying slichot when? Basically during the day. Not everybody's davening vasikin and saying slichot before that. But the point is, let's say around here, you could get attacked for perhaps even insinuating that it is permissible to have a congregation get together at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. It's 4 midnight and say the slichot as Yom Kippur approaches. But that's not correct. Yes, it's true according to Kabbalah. There's a lot that they say about how bad it is to do this. But the truth, like Rav Zuriel always stood for, is that, like the Rambam also says, anytime a community gets together to supplicate before the Holy One, so God listens. And there's nothing special about certain times. I'll close with a prayer that we. Thank you, guys. I close that we live and we strive to meet the standards that Zuriel set for us in our personal behavior and in our Torah study. Zechro Baruch, yes, like the Rambam says, the tzaddikim, you don't even give them a tombstone. They're ma'asim tovim, and especially their teachings. That's what survives them. That's what lasts after them. That's what gives them their eternity, basically. Thank you very much. I guess close here. If there's any questions about Rav Zuriel's writings or how to obtain his svarim or other things, we could discuss those also. And if anybody has also a personal reflection of Rav Zuriel, if they had the zchus to meet him, so there's a website, an email address you could send it to if the family has requested. And yeah, I guess we'll open it there for any other questions. Just because we always end these things with questions. No, okay. It's not. I wish everybody good night, Shabbat Shalom, and continue to strive. And the Chodesh Tov. May it be a productive Elul. Have a good time in yeshiva.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.